all of the natural behaviors I can possibly provide opportunities for them to do. But now I also introduce them to lots of stuff they would never encounter in the wild,
right,
because they are under captive management. And I find that they will do things under captive management and interact with things and seemingly enjoy things, or they wouldn't repeat the behaviors with objects they'd never encounter out in nature.
Welcome back to another episode of the Reptile Podcast with myself, Brian from Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue, and Greg from the Reptile Studio. We are here with our guest this evening, Lori Torini, whom you can find all over Facebook, Instagram, I do believe, correct, and YouTube. Target training snakes is one of her most amazing things that I find interesting, and we're going to deep dive that in a little bit. But she does all kinds of different animal rescue. Greg, what did you want to ask Miss Lori?
Oh my God, I'm still tired.
That's okay. And I tend to just talk. So if you're quiet for too long, I might just start spewing information.
I am the same way.
So
I'm very curious about where you got the idea to target train a serpent. I know people have been doing it with monitors and zoological stuff for many, many years, but what made you jump from seeing something like that, or however you first learned about it, to thinking that serpents would be capable of it as well?
Well, I had never thought about it. There's really no reason scientifically why they would not be capable of it. But I'm not a big target trainer of other species, so it wasn't something that I'd used with other animals too much. I use a lot of verbal signals, hand signals, voice cues, some light cues with animals, but I hadn't really used a target. Targeting is used a lot with zoo animals that you can't be in free contact with, and it works really well. But I hadn't felt a need with livestock and domestic animals like dogs and cats and small exotic mammal pets to use a target. And I had acquired a jungle carpet python that was just on the extreme end of the fearful, shy, reactive temperament spectrum. So you have bold animals, shy animals, and some in between. And she was really extreme in her fear and anxiety about any change and about people. And she would evacuate her bladder and bowels. She would exhibit saltatory locomotion, which is really not that usual in a snake. She would just jump suddenly from one spot to another. She would extreme escape and avoidance behavior, just so over the top fearful. I was trying to brainstorm how to help her, because this is not how I wanted her to experience her life, and it's not how I wanted our relationship to be. And I started with passive habituation, and I put her enclosure in a really well-traveled area, but I filled it up with massive amounts of stuff. So she had a window in it that she could look out onto the world as she chose, but she didn't have to. And more and more I would see her at the window looking out. And so that was one aspect of how I was helping her, just leaving her alone and letting her habituate to what was going on. But then when I was feeding her on a plate for a number of reasons. And I noticed one day when I put the plate in there that she came over and stared at the plate before I put the food on it. And then after she'd eaten, she came back to where the plate was and got in an ambush position above the plate. And I said, well, she's targeting on that plate. And I didn't mean for her to do that, but she's targeting on the plate. That just made the light bulb go on in my head that I could target train her. And I taped that plate to a stick and I started target training her. And now she follows that target to shift out of her enclosure to a holding station and back in. And that was just a change in our world that was phenomenal because now I could easily get her out of the enclosure and clean and do things I needed to without stressing her at all. And it was her choice to follow the target out.
Right.
And then she would go back in. And neither of us were distressed about the interaction, and it was safe for everybody. But literally, she is the one that gave me the idea to start target training the snakes. And so then I thought, well, I wonder how that would work with some of the others. And it works phenomenally well, to the point where I can't imagine owning a snake that I didn't do that foundation behavior with. We have 113 snakes here, and every single one is target trained.
That's pretty remarkable. Is it very time consuming? The training itself, or do they pick it up pretty quickly?
They pick it up extremely quickly, because if you think about their natural eating behavior in the wild, they find prey somewhere and they have to remember where they found that and return to that location, especially pythons and boas, and sit and wait and be very patient and see if they can acquire prey at that location again. And we're talking sometimes days, weeks, maybe even months between meals. So when they go through a target training session at this meal, and maybe I do it 2 weeks later, they remember it so quickly because they already associate that target with the food. And once they're doing that, then I can build other behaviors using that foundation skill.
Right.
So first, you just want them to associate that target with food so they pay attention to it. And then you want them to learn down the road, the target doesn't mean food. The target means that contingent upon performing some other behavior first, you can earn reinforcement, which is food or perhaps something else. Some of mine will target for an opportunity to come out of their enclosures.
Which makes total sense. Yeah, I definitely feel like snakes are not as stupid as we once thought they were. As human beings, we think all animals are beneath us, but I think their complex thinking and behaviors are not just inner they're learned and understanding. They aren't just inherited traits that kind of work sometimes and it flows through the species, and that's how they've continued to exist. I think there are definitely individuals that learn very quickly the differences between things, like a human isn't a target, a human isn't food, even a human doesn't have to be feared. It's not a predator. I've had the luxury of probably having I don't know, upwards of 400 or 500 ball pythons in my care throughout the last 18 years. And I mean, there's some that are very understanding, and there have been a few that have taken 4 or 5 months to become habituated to understanding that I'm not a threat. I don't mean you any harm, and I'm going to pick you up, and we're going to have this interaction, and it doesn't mean that at the end of it I'm going to try and eat you. So
yeah, that's a species that's really interesting compared to many other snake species, who tend to have a lot more innate resilience than that species. And I work with 25 here, and their default defensive behavior is to freeze, hide. And animals that do that, even people, if you're faced with some stressful situation, if your first reaction is to freeze or hide or not move, you have a higher level of stress hormones released into the body, and it takes longer to recover from that than a human or another animal that would flee or fight.
Right.
And those types of animals tend to be more resilient to change and to coping with stress. And so given that the Royal Python's default defense behavior is to freeze and hide, it tells us a lot of things about their temperament. They're probably a lot more stressed. Well, not probably, they are absolutely more fearful and stressed than people think they are. That's balling up and freezing is not docility. It's extreme terror and fear. And it's likely going to take them longer to recover than a snake that had struck at you and you got away, or the situation's over and now they're fine the next day.
Right. They did what they were programmed to do, whereas the others are kind of suffering in silence, if you were.
Correct. That's a really good way to put it. So it's a species that I find interesting. Also, because a lot of the species I work with and a lot of the studies that I've read, most snakes, it's an innate behavior to eat, but the way that the food is acquired and handled and managed as they eat it changes based on prey type and size and experience level and learning how to handle that.
Right.
And most snakes as they age into adulthood, get more efficient at acquiring and handling prey. And with the royal pythons, it's the opposite. A longitudinal 3-year study was done on several from hatching to 3 years old. And they actually got worse at prey acquisition and worse at strike performance. And it's just quite interesting that that species seems to be such an outlier among some of the others that I personally work with, that as they learn and grow, they get more efficient at tasks and they build more confidence and less fear and more resilience. And the royal pythons don't necessarily do that. It's very, very interesting.
It is interesting too, because when I used to feed, when I first started feeding my carpet python chicks, the first few times that I gave her a chick, it took her, at one time, it must have been an hour of like poking around it, you know, like just touching her face to like every area, trying to eat the leg, like could not figure it out. To now, if I give her a chick, she will grab it like right on the head, you know, coil up for like 30 seconds and then just start eating it, and it's gone like when you blink, by the time you blink an eye. And consistently. But in the beginning, the first time she was offered one, it was just complete like, oh shit, what did I just grab?
Yeah.
And
What is
do I
this
do with
thing?
it?
What is this
Doesn't
thing?
make sense. Yeah.
What are these? What is this object that I'm trying to figure out?
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah,
that
and
is
they
it.
learn. I mean, learning occurs with reptiles, snakes, and other reptiles the same as it does with other species. Behavior science and the laws of learning work across species. You know, gravity doesn't work different here than in New York. And
Right.
the physics in my kitchen are the same physics as in yours.
Mhm.
And so that's how behavior science and the laws of learning are. And I think people don't realize that those impact all animals, all vertebrates, even some invertebrates like insects and things now learn the same way.
Mhm.
And if they couldn't, then they wouldn't have survived all these millions of years of evolution and time on this planet.
Yep.
And they wouldn't adapt to changing geologic and climate conditions, and they wouldn't adapt to living under captive management. And you know, they just wouldn't survive if they weren't able to learn and problem solve and grow more resilience to dealing with a chaotic world.
Right. I mean, if you wanted to make the next evolutionary step in a path, I think changing your environment to suit your needs would be after the concepts of learning and basic learning. So, you know, I mean, from a
Tool use is up there that very
Yep.
few animals can do. Although I've seen species of snakes like move sand
Yep.
and move their hides and sort of manipulate the environment some, but that's not really considered tool use.
Yeah, and I
But they
don't think
can
it's consistent
manipulate.
across individuals either. I mean, I've definitely seen a few do it, but I don't think species wide that there's a specific species that I could reference to say that, you know, these guys are definitely, you know, they wanted their hide there, that's why they're doing it. Some just happen upon it, you know, and it's a situation that benefits them and they thrive because of it. Happenstance in captivity is something that is really hard to explain to anyone that doesn't pay enough attention, right? You know,
I have had a breeder tell me that their snake moved the lay box and he kept moving it back to where he thought it should be, and she kept moving it back to a specific spot until after 4 or 5 times he said, well, obviously that's where she wants it. And I said, well, why didn't you just leave it the first time? And he said, well, I had to be sure she was doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Why? I mean, unless you're doing some kind of scientific testing, you're going to use that as information. But you know,
you know, that's good information for me. Obviously, she was doing it on purpose if she kept moving it from where you had it.
She had free will and choice, and she chose that she wanted that object in that spot, and that's where she wanted it. End of story. So what kind of snakes do you work with in your facility currently or past?
So personally, if I wasn't doing this as a profession, I would I really like carpet pythons, Bredl's pythons, Morelia.
Okay.
So I have every species of carpet python that's legal to have in the United States. And I have a rough scale python, Morelia carinata. And then I have several Brettles pythons, which are really my favorite species. I have 31 Brettles pythons. But aside from that, I have a lot of species here that the general pet owning public tends to keep. So I keep them here because I do a lot of behavior consults and training consults and coaching. It helps me to have the species here to work with so that I can appropriately advise other people. So I have corn snakes, royal pythons, king snakes. I have a rat snake. I'm looking around here, a hognose snake,
Okay.
a false water cobra, a pine snake, and or not a pine snake, a gopher snake, and a bull snake. I have an Escalapian snake,
Oh.
which is not native to the United States, and not many people have them as pets. That one I got out of curiosity to see how they were to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 super dwarf reticulated pythons,
Okay.
and I think, oh, I do have the boa. I always forget the boas. You can tell I'm a python person. I have a leopard boa from Vin Russo, and I have 2 Colombian rainbow boas and 2 Brazilian rainbow boas.
Okay. That's I definitely heavy carpet. Moriella is, I mean, I live in Moriella. I've done it. I've had my coastal. I mean, I've had, I'm on my 2nd generation of educational animal with a female carpet. So her mom was my first
cool.
educational animal 20 years ago, 25 years ago. She was already 10 when I got her originally. And she only just recently passed away within this past 8 months here. She was 27 or 28. And her daughter is,
wow, that's amazing.
Her daughter's 13 right now. And she is going strong, doing her thing. I have a couple of the siblings. I've only bred a few clutches of carpets. I don't advocate breeding. I'm not like that, but 10 years ago was a whole different world for reptiles and breeding and the way I felt about it.
Yeah, we don't
then.
do any breeding here of any animals.
Yeah, that's good.
So none of these are animals that I have bred. We've taken in a few mammals that were pregnant when we took them in.
Yep, that
so
happens.
We do have some little families, but it wasn't because we bred them.
Yeah, I do have the occasional leopard gecko come in and lay some eggs, and you know, those I'll obviously put in the incubator. It's always fun to see science and nature at work. I'm a keeper at heart. Originally, that's how this all started. It was bringing the wilderness into my home, you know, 25 years ago when this was all new to everyone, and bins and racks and all these things were the way to go. I was the one that was like, no, I want the rainforest right there. I want to look at the rainforest. I don't care what's in it. That's the rainforest, and then something that can live in it. That's fine with me. You know, like it was a very different way of existing back then compared to shows now.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yep.
I can't imagine having the animals and not seeing them and interacting with them. And by interacting, I don't even necessarily mean touching and being in physical contact with it. Interacting with them and watching their behavior and the training, interacting with them in that way that you're communicating, I would like you to do this, and then have the animal consent and they do the behavior. It's very exciting. But I can't imagine, like, I study behavior and training, and I can't do that if I can't see the animals. So I have to be able to see what they're doing and give them opportunities to express all of their behavioral possibilities. And so many of them are out a lot. I don't force them out, but I have enough that want out of their enclosures. That, like, last night I had 7 snakes out at once, and I'm walking around, and I had to put blinders on because I saw more at their doors, like pushing, and I'm like, I can't.
Do you typically, do you typically let the same species out at the same time, just out of curiosity?
I don't mix like the bull snake or the gopher snake or the king snakes with other snakes, because I worry that they would try to eat the other snakes or each other.
They may.
But yeah, I have the other snakes. I have them out at the same time. Like last night, who was out? I had some Brettles pythons out, and a corn snake, and one of my inland carpet pythons, and my super dwarf retic. And interestingly, I have a picture. The other night I had 2 Brettles pythons and a retic all on the sink counter staring at the sink. And honestly makes me a little nervous when they all congregate in the same areas and get in ambush position. When I first started noticing they would do this, I would move some of them. It made me really nervous. I'm like, no, you can't all be here. This is no. But now I'm here watching them. So obviously if something happened, I could intervene immediately, but they
Right.
don't bother each other. And I've had one of my Bredl's pythons and my retic literally touching each other,
Yep.
like deciding to sit in the same spot and look at whatever, I guess the path they think maybe food's going to run by.
The mysteries
And
of
I
life.
kind of got over worrying about that. But at first I was super uncomfortable with it.
Is there anything in your expertise, I guess, would be the best way to phrase it, that you would say, you more so than what you just spoke about, worrying about that one specific thing, that you worried about originally when you moved from other animals into snake world, that now you're just like, whatever. No, they're fine. That's okay. It's not a big deal.
You mean having the snakes interact with other species,
In
or
general,
that I worried
in general.
about my interaction with
Whether
them?
it's your interaction with them or maybe a husbandry cue that might have been a little overbearing in the beginning versus now, kind of a thing with experience.
Not really. I did temporarily. We took in three little rat snakes that are from the mountains in Asia that have to be kept really cool. And I don't even remember what they were. Really pretty, like orange banded rat snakes.
Bamboo rat snakes, probably.
Yeah. And
animals into snake world, that now you're just like, whatever. No, they're fine. That's okay. It's not a big deal.
you mean having the snakes interact with other species,
In
or
general,
that I worried
in general.
about my interaction with
whether
them?
it's your interaction with them or maybe a husbandry cue that might have been a little overbearing in the beginning versus now, kind of a thing with experience.
Not really. I did temporarily. We took in three little rat snakes that are from the mountains in Asia that have to be kept really cool. And I don't even remember what they were. Really pretty, like orange banded rat snakes.
Bamboo rat snakes, probably.
Yeah. And well, it's Colorado's pretty hot, and
yeah,
we didn't have an air conditioner at that time, and I was really stressed and worried about maintaining a cool enough temperature for them. And they weren't here that long. It was a temporary situation. I was kind of relieved when they left, because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to maintain the environment as cool as they needed. But the others, I haven't, because I heavily research any species that comes here before it gets here, unless it's some kind of an emergency thing. Like we did have, like a spur of the moment, someone dump off a children's python. And so I'm like, what is this? And I'm like scurrying to Google Scholar, like trying to figure out. And it turns out they're super easy to take care of, so it wasn't a problem. But usually,
children's python.
It was a mom. It was a mom who, it was her kids, and he left, and she didn't know what to do with it, and I don't know. But yeah, I haven't really been worried, because I've done such thorough research before I bring the snakes here, and I'd already been working and caring with snakes at the herpetology lab at a local college before I added snakes to my life again. And then when I was in my early 20s, I had a snake. So it wasn't like I was
not
worried
like you
about
were
anything
new
like
to
that.
it. Yeah.
Correct.
I
Plus,
find
I'm
that
so used to taking in different species at an animal sanctuary. Sometimes you get species in that you've not necessarily cared for before. And there are certain staples that you just learn. Those are the things you look up first. What do they eat? When do they sleep? What climate do they need? And then you go from there. And
yeah, back when I started keeping reptiles, it wasn't a thing of go to Google and figure out things. We charted the rainfall of the average rainfall in that particular part of the world and where they come from and what they do naturally, and try to mimic it as best as possible, at least in my circle of beginnings in reptile community stuff. And it was a lot of fun.
That's a great start, and what we did here too. But now I'm so far into it that now I do that and make sure they can do all of the natural behaviors I can possibly provide opportunities for them to do. But now I also introduce them to lots of stuff they would not never encounter in the wild,
Right.
because they are under captive management. And I
Mhm.
find that they will do things under captive management and interact with things and seemingly enjoy things, or they wouldn't repeat the behaviors with objects they'd never encounter out in nature.
Right, right, absolutely. Climbing a fuzzy carpeted pole or something along those lines is
Right.
your general idea, I believe, right? Some similarly across the board.
I just introduce novel objects to them, or novel opportunities, and then I see what they do with it. Like sometimes
Yeah,
I'm going to throw
so
something
awesome.
away and I think, well, that doesn't seem like it would hurt the snake. I'm going to put it in the enclosure and see what happens. And sometimes I'm surprised. And sometimes they ignore it, and a few days later I throw it away. But
Anyway, right.
you're not going to know unless you try.
If you
And I
if you
feel like they shouldn't be restricted to only things that they might encounter in the wild. One, we can't provide 100% of everything that
That's
they
true.
would ever encounter in the wild. And two, we can give them more opportunities, because they are under captive management, to try to make up for the fact that they're under captive management and we've already taken away their freedom.
Right.
So let's give them opportunities and not restrict ourselves to only certain opportunities.
Right. Right. And that's
It's
a
not
great
for us to
philosophy.
decide what the snake wants to do and what they don't want to do, or what they might engage with and not. It's just
Right.
our job to give them the opportunity and then see what they choose.
And that's a great philosophy. That's an absolute flooring philosophy. That's a really good it's a really great way to interact with your world in general, regardless of the species. I think all animals deserve that same kind of thought process and dealing with them regardless. Your cat was once a wild animal at some point. Through evolution, it
Well, and
became...
look at zoo animals and all of the different enrichment items and environmental stimulation that are given to zoo animals, like fire hoses and exercise balls and beach balls and
really
ice
amazing.
cubes and things. They're not going to encounter that in the wild. Well,
Nope.
maybe ice cubes if you're a polar bear, but
right.
But they're interacting with them under captive management because it's a healthy outlet for energy that they can't expend in other ways.
Yeah, let your toddler run around the backyard so they're not in the house drawing on the walls. Yep, I definitely get it, and that's definitely something from personal experience, just so we're clear. But yeah, it's a fascinating world of reptiles. There's so many different ways to interact with them, and for the first time in 20 years doing this, your way for me is very different than my way. And usually there's differences, of course, because not everybody does everything the same, but I really like the idea of training in general. I've worked with alligators, I've worked with monitor lizards for many years, and they are all brilliant. They all have cognitive abilities to learn and understand, and they know what's going on. Whereas I don't think until probably 4 or 5 years ago, I never really thought that snakes would have that same cognitive ability. I don't know whether it's because they didn't interact in that I could look at them and think they were thinking way, or whatever the case may be, whatever in my adult life changed in 5 years ago. It was one of those situations where I was just like, I wonder what that ball python is actually thinking. I know it's actually thinking. It's doing something.
Their body language is hard. Well, I used to think their body language was hard to read. They have armor, right? They're wearing armor all the time. They don't have limbs. They can't talk with their hands and be expressive. They don't have eyelids to blink.
Yep.
But now that I watch them so closely, I can see eye movement, and I can tell a lot just by eye movement and the size of the pupils. And I can tell by the subtle things they're doing with their body as a whole, which parts of their body are moving, which are not moving, how tightly are they coiled, are they not coiled at all? Or I can see little shifts in their head position or their tail position. But it took me several years to be able to read all of those very minute body language cues. And then I think that society, because in the 1950s, there was a person that came up with this triune brain concept, which was totally debunked right after it came out, that our higher functioning brains grew on top of our reptile brain. But for some reason, that idea caught on, even though it's completely false. And I think that for some reason that stuck with people. But snakes and other reptiles have all the same or homologous brain structures as other vertebrates. And
Right.
vertebrates are all of us that have a spinal cord and all of the other characteristics that make us vertebrates. And when I say structures, it doesn't mean, well, we have a neocortex, they have a neocortex. They have a similar part to their brain that serves the same function as our neocortex, which
Right.
is this dorsal ventricular ridge that birds and reptiles have, and the cells in the pallium, which houses that structure, are the same as the cells in our neocortex, which is the part of our brain that handles all of our higher functioning. And even if we didn't know that, we can see that snakes think and problem solve and have to do that, or they would never survive everything they encounter in nature.
Right.
And we can see that they are able to learn through instrumental conditioning, through operant conditioning. They can learn very complex tasks. And so if they didn't have the brain structures to do those things, they would be probably not here anymore.
Right. Right. Through failure to evolve, through failure to survive as a species. Right.
So talking about, like snakes doing things that they wouldn't normally experience in the wild. I've been thinking about this. Now, I originally, when I first started target training my carpet python, I was telling my boss about it, and his reaction to it was not what I expected. And he said something along the lines of, like, oh, expose it, something it's not used to, or basically just saying, like, why would you expose the snake to like something what is like seemingly unnatural to it, basically. And I was wondering what your take on that was. Like, what's your thought process?
It's not natural for them to be under captive management in the first place, right? There is nothing natural. Like, the snakes didn't ask to come in and live in our homes and our zoos and our labs and
well, mine did,
and say, I want you to put me in this cage. I mean, that's completely unnatural. And so starting with the premise that they are under captive management and throwing out the ethics of whether that should even be the case or not, we need to give them opportunities to express behaviors that they would express in the wild. And part of that is problem solving and using their cognitive abilities to perform tasks. And if they are sitting in a box with no ability or no outlet for that energy, then you start seeing maladaptive behaviors like nose rubbing, face pushing. Some of those maladaptive behaviors can get very physical. And then on the other extreme, sometimes the animal just gives up and becomes apathetic and lethargic and sits there and does nothing, because for a lot of reasons, some organisms go one way and some organisms go another way, depending on if you have a more pessimistic or optimistic outlook on the world. But I wonder what you said to him, or if you thought to say that we couldn't have these animals under captive management, these wild animals, which snakes are, and not be able to interact with them in ways that are safe to care for them under captive management. So zoo animals, you can't go in and put a tiger on a leash and put it in the car and take it to the vet. You can't, go in and force an elephant to lift up its foot to do a hoof trim or foot care. You've got to train the animals. And this training is just teaching them to communicate with us in meaningful ways so that we're able to ask them, would you please lift your foot up for me? Have them consent and say, sure, I will. We pay them for doing that with some reward, a food reinforcer, an activity they like to do, something. And then that behavior is repeated in the future. And I think of how difficult it would be to manage these wild animals if we didn't have the ability to introduce training to them. And I don't have to think about it, because if you look at 100 years ago, how did we manage these wild animals?
Right.
With force, with abuse, with physical violence. It was terrible. Or the answer was to sedate them. You dart them, you sedate them for everything you need to do. And that's not really that safe to be constantly having to sedate an animal to do a hoof trim or to do teeth cleaning or to
Right.
trim nails on a bear. So it's much better to teach them to cooperatively engage in their own care than to have
And
to force it.
to be rewarded for it as well.
Right, it's their
it
decision.
makes things like it's too late for me to say inoculations correctly. Sorry. But it makes total sense to give them a proper behavior so that not only can a vet look at them, but now I've seen I think it was, I don't remember what zoo it was. It was a TV show that I was watching, and they had a big cat go into some kind of restraint box, lay down, and the vets could check with an ultrasound. Right, no, the cat didn't care. It was eating meat on one end, so who cares about the ultrasound on the other? I don't remember what they were. I don't know if it was a pregnancy or if it was
Right.
checking the stomach or what have you, but they were doing something which was medically needed. And because the cat had been raised doing that behavior, it was not a big deal. And that's great. That's
Right.
way less stress. We here in the United States, we all endure way too much stress compared to some other, what we
Right.
call sophisticated countries. But it's stress is really bad. And when you have a captive animal perpetually enduring stress, it's not conducive to the longevity of not only that animal, but your interactions as well. 20 years ago, 30
No.
years ago, things were still just changing into this forward thinking, this enrichment thinking, this positive interaction, even with these zoological creatures, and people were being bitten, eaten, ripped, pulled into the enclosure.
Right.
And it was still, what do you think they're going to do? What do you think they're going to do? They have literally nothing to do. They want to eat, and you're
Right.
forcing them to do the things that they don't want to do. They don't know what any of it is. And now it's a
Well,
positive interaction with keepers.
They're put into a human world, which is totally not natural. So I would tell your boss, if your boss had said that to me, I'd still probably be talking. But, but yes, they're not going to encounter a plastic target or metal target or whatever you're using in the wild, but they learn to target on objects in the wild. So if they know that mice or other prey come out of that hole, I guarantee they're going to go back to that hole and target it. And if they see similar holes, they're going to go to those because they've built that association.
Right.
So they don't encounter walls or lights or music or the same vibrations that they encounter in our zoos and labs and households. So nothing they encounter is natural, not just the target. That's like the least of what they encounter that's not natural. But we have to help them learn how to cope with living in a human world, which is completely alien to them. It would be like us going to an alien planet, and we have no idea what anything means or what anything is, and we're just overwhelmed by the stimuli. We have to help them learn how to live in our world, and we can't expect them to automatically know what things are. We can't expect them to automatically know, well, it's okay to do this, but I don't want you to do that. How would they know that?
Yeah, I think, the idea of, for some reason with, I think, him, like the thought of showing a target to a snake and like making them, quote unquote, making them like follow the target is like unnatural. That like the bird or the rat, should just be like given to them. And I think that's, and I don't.
But they have to follow scent trails, follow other cues to find prey in the wild. They don't just wake up and prey goes in front of them. I mean, maybe occasionally they luck out and that happens, but they literally have to leave their den or tree or wherever they are safely hunkered down while they're resting. They literally have to go and take substantial steps to locate, find, acquire, manage, and then consume that prey. And then they have to find their way back to where they know it's safe. Problem solving and completing tasks along the way, both directions.
Yep.
So it's completely not natural to just put food in front of an animal under captive management and here's your food. I mean, that's completely not how they would eat in the wild. It's the
and I
opposite.
think
They have to work for resources in the wild. And when we
Oh, yeah.
don't have them work for resources under captive management, that's where we start seeing stereotypies and maladaptive behaviors. Because when they don't have to spend 100% of their energy budget on survival and reproduction, what are they going to spend that energy on? If
Right.
we're not giving them stuff to do that is proactive and healthy, they're going to find other stuff to do that sometimes is hurts themselves. You know, sometimes it's very maladaptive and self-damaging.
Yeah, see, I'm glad that this is being recorded because I think these things, but then when it comes time to actually explain it or like answer to somebody's, critiques, I'm like, but like that's my, so like I'm gonna refer him to this episode whenever it comes out.
There's
But
there's
any science is complicated. I mean,
Yep.
I'm not on this podcast answering physics questions, right? Or algebra questions or well, I know a little bit of neuroscience because it's so helpful in what I do with behavior. But my point is, this is what I do, is I'm educated in behavior and training. So it's
Yep.
easy for me to come up with these answers. But if I had none of this training, I would be sitting here like, I don't know. Let's go
Yeah.
ask a behaviorist.
Yeah,
And I
no,
know
I'm
when you got your dwarf reticulated pythons, did you get them both from Reach Out Reptiles?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I think it was either, I don't know if it was when you and I had talked originally, or if it was in one of your videos where you just talked about having a person begin like the target training there before you got them.
Oh, I did. That was the
yeah.
second one. So they donated one several years ago because Garrett said, I'm interested in the work you're doing. I'd be interested to see what you thought about super dwarf retics and how they would respond to training. But then the second one I bought and I paid someone there, Aiden, an employee there, to start target training the animal before he got shipped because it was winter and he was going to be there a while. And once the animal belongs to me, I can't stand the thought of it just sitting there with no physical exercise or mental stimulation. And so Aiden started target training the animal there, and he took it out once or twice a week for enrichment activities and physical exercise. And it arrived here clearly recognizing the significance of the target and already just fine with roaming around and being handled. And it worked out really well.
Because I have a royal that I've been trying to rehome, or adopt out for, I don't even know how long it's been now.
It's funny
and
with
I was thinking
royals.
about it. I was thinking about how I should start doing that. I should start target training with her because I think that would be a great, sort of like, selling point or whatever, phrase it is for somebody.
Yes.
Like, oh, look at like this.
I think it would because Bob Bledsoe over at Green Room Pythons had just one clutch of snakes last year, and two of my clients bought two of them, and he had started target training at least one of them before it went to the new home, and she just couldn't be happier with that snake, and it's a royal python. But he did this from the time they were hatchlings, which I do think makes a difference. I have some older royals here that they've learned the target training, but I'm just warning you, it takes much longer. And then also, if you look at their history, this weird thing that they go through as they age, where they get less adept at acquiring food and striking at food. Some of them that were very, very good and spot on with target training and shifting out and really engaged with the activity at like 6 weeks old, 8 weeks old, 3 months old. Now that they've turned over a year, they're a little more apathetic about engaging in the activity. They're kind of like, okay, I'll look at the target, but I don't feel like shifting out.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because I don't see that like with many of the other snakes. I have some that will just follow the target forever until I give the signal that the behavior is done and they're going to get reinforced.
I was wondering, do you think some of that might be a cue into the fact that as royal pythons are getting older, they are realizing they have to do less to actually acquire their prey in captivity, and thus
I don't know.
their
I
level
don't know.
of
And the authors of the paper didn't have an explanation either. They just reported this is what we observed, and we really don't know why. And I've speculated as to why. I was giving them maybe more credit than they deserve, thinking, well, because they'll strike the prey's here and they'll strike way over here sometimes. And I'm like, the food's here. And I'm thinking, well, maybe in their mind, they're anticipating that by the time their strike
movement.
reaches the food, it will have hopped over here. And they don't
Could be.
realize that. But maybe that's giving them too much credit.
Yeah, I mean, I have a 17-year-old Royal, and he's great. I mean, he every time cues in, no problem, figures out exactly where he's got to go, and it's almost a hit every time. He's
well,
on,
I also then question, is that and the authors question this too, is some of the poor performance an artifact of captive breeding for so many years? Because I do have an adult Royal that she eats quail and chicks and rats and mice, and she never misses, and she's spot on with her target training, and she will seek to come out when she's hungry and like display hunting behavior, which to me is more how they would have to act in the wild or they wouldn't be eating.
Right.
And some of them are just like so apathetic about it. I wonder if that's an artifact of so many generations of captive breeding and not having to have those skills to survive. I mean, are we producing a gene pool of animals that wouldn't know how to survive in the wild?
Right.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you said that.
Definitely. I mean, and a lot of the animals that are of that typical 15 to 25 year range are, for lack of a better use of words, generation one, of a lot of the heavier duty breeding that was going on back then. And they're still so close to wild that it wasn't even really a separation of the two. They might as well have been wild at that point. Right. I do believe the male that I have is he's a pastel. I don't follow genetics much. I mean, I don't follow the ball python morph genetics much. Genetics is fine. I don't follow that stuff. But he, and I mean, he's fantastic. He really is a very on point, active, healthy adult male Royal that does everything he's supposed to do as a serpent that would be engaged with and handled constantly and interacted with for 17 years. He's never, ever had any interaction with a human that was negative. This is an animal that I've used thousands of times in educational lectures, and kids have seen him close up and interacted with him. And he has been doing educational lectures with me for 14 years now. And we do, anywhere from 50 to 100 a year. I don't really know exactly how to quantify that, and he's great. He'll go out, he'll do a show, he'll eat the second we get home. He has no qualms about what he's doing, where he goes, how he gets there. And I have other ball pythons that,
that would be an animal, if you were breeding, that you would want to reproduce. And I think that all the time. I look around here and think, well, if I was breeding, I wouldn't breed that one because it's a slower learner compared to its conspecifics. If I look at that snake and think, if it was given a problem-solving task, it would fail. Or, if it was in the wild, it probably wouldn't make it. But if I look at the snake and it's performing problem-solving tasks, and it's eating well, and it's eating varied prey, and it's targeting well, and responding to learning more as it ages, those would be the ones that I would reproduce. Or if one is particularly friendly and amenable to living with people and other animals, that would be the one I would reproduce. I wouldn't reproduce the one that's nervous and anxious and overreactive and biting and not learning the behaviors that we're trying to teach them. That's not the one whose genetics I would want to pass on.
And I feel like that's a concept that's lost on the reptile industry, period, is this concept of breeding for temperament. I have talked to a lot of blood python breeders, and that is one of the things in that world that they have really sought to do, was consciously make an effort to try to remove these super high strung ones from the gene pool and try and create these more, I don't know what the proper word is, but I'm going to go with malleable and attainable and interactable. Nope, that's not a real
Well,
word.
and I think that's just important, not only from our aspect as keepers, because if a family
Right.
gets a pet or a zoo wants an outreach animal,
Right.
they want one with a good temperament that's not going to be reactive about every little thing.
Right.
But also that's better for the animal, because if I'm that animal that absolutely everything scares me, I have generalized fear and anxiety about the world, and you're putting me in these situations, I'm not going to have a good life. I'm going to constantly be experiencing chronic stress, and that's not fair
Right.
to me, the animal, either.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a great. I think it's I've seen a lot of differences out of the last like 4 years or so, 5 years or so, even with the people who are very public in the reptile industry, changing a lot of their statements. And I don't want to say going back on what they once said, but they're evolving, keeping their reptiles in a much different way than they thought was applicable or acceptable 10 or 12 years ago. They're you know, pushing for the larger enclosures. They're pushing for the understanding that these animals are sentient. And I'm not using any names specifically, but I'm sure we can guess 90% of what I'm talking about. And I just, you know, it's really nice to see that what a lot of the keepers who I grew up around and I grew up with, and we were all kind of keeping at the same time, it's really nice to see the really big names publicly talking about proper, you know, interactions, proper sentience, care. And, you know, these aren't throwaway animals. They're not to make $1. Stop trying to breed it to make money. These are not, you know, it's really nice to see that entire shift in our hobby. It's not completely there, obviously, but it's definitely one of those situations that I find remarkable to see it happening and have wanted it to happen for so long.
Well, and we should be changing our minds, and we should be changing and progressing our care as we learn more, as we have more information.
Yep, I agree completely.
That's what we should be doing. I don't train dogs the same way today as I did 20 years ago.
Right.
I look back and wish that that's what we should be doing. I don't train dogs the same way today as I did 20 years ago.
Right.
I look back and wish that wasn't even me. I think of the way that I trained dogs 20 years ago, which was the norm, was horrendous.
Right. Right.
So we all learn and grow and progress.
That's right.
As science advances and as we learn more about behavior and as we learn more about how positive reinforcement works and how to enhance animal well-being, it's our duty to progress, because it's our fault these animals are in our care. That's
right. That's couldn't have poetically put much better than I could have said it. It really is. It really is on us to make sure we know what we're doing is the right way to do it. And if we have new information that's presented to us, we should take that information and apply it in any way possible. And even if we're not you and doing it with 133 snakes, even if we pick 5 out of the groups that we work with and we start there and we just try. And you know, I somebody referred to me the other day as tap training, and I was like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. And apparently it's, you know, you tap at the serpent inside its enclosure to make sure it knows that either it's a handling session or a food session. For 20 years, I have been going in with a mild rubber coated hook, and I just rub their back so that they know that it's not food coming in. When I am offering food, it's a completely hands-off scenario. I don't touch them.
Right, and it's much easier. So I use a snake hook as my no choice cue. It's the only time I ever use it. So if I use the hook, the snake knows it's going to be picked up, and it's either going to, well, I don't ever have to take any of them out, but usually it's to put them back.
Right.
Usually it's they don't want to go back, and I'm using the snake hook to pick them up and put them back. Some of the snakes, I don't even need the hook, but that's their cue. That means if I'm interacting with you with this hook, I'm going to handle you, and you can't opt out. But this is what we're doing. And it gives them a heads up as to what's going to happen. It takes out the element of surprise, so they accept it a lot better.
Right.
It's the only time I use the hook. It's a lot easier for the snake to understand when I'm touched with this object, I get picked up. That's a positive and a positive.
Yep. And
they have no idea that touching, like if I touch you on the head with my
Mhm.
hand, how do you know that that means that I'm not feeding you versus I'm not gonna poke your eyes
Well,
out, or
I
I'm not
just
going to
meant
change your water? The absence of a behavior following a cue is really not something that organisms are able to learn. So
right.
usually, so when people say, well, I tap them on the head so they know they're not eating,
Well, I don't tap them on
you
the head,
don't
but
know that
yeah.
that's what they know. They may think the tap on the head means you're going to change the water, or that
Right,
you're
right,
going
right.
to clean, or that you're going to pick them up. They really don't associate
With a
the
food thing.
absence of a behavior with
Okay.
something you just did. They associate substantial behaviors that are happening with whatever occurred just prior.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
Like they don't understand that something didn't happen, and that's what this
I always
means.
related it to the difference in the scenario, right? So if I enter, I open, you're touched, that means it's an interaction that's going to be whether it's picked up or changed the water, as you said, versus zero interaction. And I open the door, and then the next item that's going to be in there in front of them is going to be a food source. I did it out of happenstance only because I don't like being bitten. I really don't know anybody that does. And we work with some interesting species, and a lot of them are very defensive when they first come to us, whether they were handled or not interacted with at all. And through the experiences that I've had being in the mouth of many, many of the animals that have come in, I have chosen to do this habitual thing in my own day, which seems to be, you know, the 17-year-old ball python, I can pick him right up. It doesn't matter what I do before, prior food, no, it doesn't matter. The carpet python is the same way. My 13-year-old little girl, the big one, forget it. I mean, you just open the door, she'd come hang out on your shoulder for 5 hours. She didn't care at all. But
I think that's why I really advocate for a positive cue.
Yeah,
that
I like
animal's
that.
going to eat.
Oop.
So some people do just use the target to mean that food is going to happen. So
Yeah,
some
I'm
people just
actually, I'm
use
going
the
to start
target
doing that. Actually, I'm going to see
for
what the
no
difference
other
is.
right, for no other reason than when you see this, you're going to get fed. When you see this, you're going to get fed. And
Right.
they don't choose to adapt that for other uses. Now
Right.
I choose to adapt it for other uses. So I separate the food from the target really quickly.
Okay.
Within 1 to 3 sessions, they're no longer getting the food just because the target appeared. Now they have to do something else.
Right.
The target is cueing, you've got to do this other thing, and then you can earn a food reinforcer. And that's how I get them to station on scales and position their body in certain ways and do other behaviors.
Gotcha.
But there is nothing wrong with using a target to just communicate to the animal that you're going to eat now. And then if they don't see that target, they should never be thinking that they're going to eat.
Right. Right.
Because
And
the target's not there.
Yeah, I definitely think I'm gonna work on that, at least with a couple of I have a 7-foot boa who's not, she's been in our care for years. She does not particularly care for me. She will let others interact with her, no problem. If you ever are around the people that I know, they will mock me because boas just don't like me at all. I don't know what it is about boas. I have never, very rarely have I had a boa that has not at least been a little defensive right at the get-go with me.
That's interesting. I wonder why that is, but that's very important to be able to know that, read their body language, and acquiesce to what they're asking. If they're asking you, if they're displaying a distance creating behavior, I feel like it, out of respect, unless it's an emergency, we should be saying, okay, I understand.
Yeah, their hands. I mean, I don't
come and grab you.
Yeah,
and
I don't
do
force myself on any of them. Yeah, I don't force myself on any of them unless you know, I'm not going to let them like sit in their own urate for a day. You know, you're going to come out. I'm sorry. That's just what, you know, proper husbandry for me overrules their momentary lack of judgment that I'm not going to hurt you, I promise.
Right.
But you know,
but
and
I feel like if people are getting bitten, it's a miscommunication.
Yep, I agree.
Or
I've been saying it for years.
Us making a mistake or
Mhm.
not listening to what the snake is or any animal is
Yep.
telling us, which
100%.
sometimes has to happen in an emergency. If it's an evacuation, a medical emergency,
Yep.
we do what we need to do.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I limit intrusiveness, and I've only ever been bitten by one snake ever. And it's
Oh.
this one that's in this enclosure right here. And he was relinquished for biting. He was relinquished for biting people. And
Yeah.
so obviously I have many of them out a lot.
Mhm.
I interact with them a lot. I train with them a lot. But if you can really read their body language and give them the respect to listen to what they're telling you, and then you don't like fall asleep on the job and not pay attention,
Yep.
you probably shouldn't get bit unless you're doing it knowingly. Like, I know that the snake's probably going to bite me, but I'm going to do this anyway. And a lot of people do that. A lot of reptile keepers do that.
Right. I'm it's more of a mandatory cleaning sessions are the only situations that I will ever put myself into a position where, okay, I may get bitten by this animal, but I don't have a choice. I really do have to clean this animal. It's of no, it's an absolute necessity to clean out this sterile enclosure or medicate the wound or whatever the case may actually be. But it's always under those mandatory pretenses. I'm not that guy that like randomly goes in and grabs. I just worked with a Savannah monitor that really came in 9 months ago and was just he was ready to fight. At 7 inches long, he was ready to fight
Wow.
anything that went in his enclosure. He was ready to take down anything that was there. He was totally huffy puffy, throat, whole 9 yards, tail with me, no problem. Now I open his door and he'll climb up my arm and he'll hang out with me. Absolutely fantastic. He'll huff and puff when other people in the room because I don't think he really gets the fact that like there's more than one human in his world.
Right.
But he's very calm with me. He interacts with me. I did a couple little videos of like we were doing a photo shoot and I was letting the photographer just take his picture as he was walking across, doing a natural movement, walking across the background of whatever this photographer had set up, which is fine with me. I don't mind letting them walk and smell and do things and interact in that way. And before that, I had never really handled him, and he walked right up my arm and he just sat there. And I think I did like a real quick video of like, when your Savannah monitor doesn't listen to you and the diva just comes out and he doesn't want to do what he's supposed to do today. And, and he was just, and it was a really weird thing in my adult life. I've never really had the time to dedicate to one animal like that. We take in tons of animals every year. And we're usually trying to get them.
Way.
Yep,
yeah, that's the best way to introduce interactions is let the animal come to you.
Yeah,
it's to back off and let them have some freedom. Obviously, you monitor what they're doing for their safety, and you're always there to intervene if you need to. But I think we intervene too soon a lot. Like I agree. Let the animal move around, let them sit down and just be still. And many times the animal will decide to come investigate you and sniff you or tongue flick at you or crawl over you. And then you can start touching reciprocally. And that's how I like to introduce it. Because if you go the opposite direction where you're forcing yourself on them, where you're handling them, they're never really going to like you. Like that's not a way to build trust.
Right. That's one of those situations that I've always in every interaction with reptiles, this animal is I need it to trust me forever. And I don't want to break its trust regardless of the situation. I want to at least treat it as accordingly as possible. There are some animals that obviously, we don't rehome if they're defensive and can't be placed. It's no different than a dog that has a chronic fear and bites unprovoked or whatever the case may be. We work with these animals as long as humanly possible. And sometimes I find homes that are willing to put in even more work than I am. And that's when an animal like that will go home. But in the case of this boa that has been in our care for, it feels like an eternity. But once a week, it's like, oh, it's today, isn't it? Oh, crap. But she lives out her life. She's not malcontent. She's not rubbing. She's not temperamental. She doesn't strike at the glass. She's not negatively interacting with me through the barrier. Only when I open that door and it's a situation of, I don't know if I smell off to her. She doesn't like me for something I might have hooked her 10 years ago, too hard, and she still doesn't like me. Who knows? whatever
We
she
have a
remembers.
handful of animals here that are very wild behaving, and then I don't handle, and I don't expect them to allow me to handle them, but they still have learned target training and are very willing to shift in and out so I can clean or do what I need to do. And as long as I don't touch them, I tell you what, they're very, very good and easy to work with.
I'm
So
definitely going to
that's
try that.
that's just been indispensable as a tool for me once I learned that snakes were so responsive to that type of training.
Yeah, I actually honestly am genuinely excited to put it into practice relatively soon, especially with that particular female at around 7 feet. That is not a comfortable mouth to be into. She's definitely quicker than I am. I'm not as fast as that snake. We have learned that a few times, but I'm very eager to put that target training into effect and see just how quickly she grasped the concept of follow this out, follow this in without me interacting with you. Can we at least exist in the same space without having all of these negative body language style interactions? You know, whether, I mean, maybe it's my body language. Maybe she sees me
baby
being
steps
frustrated.
first, though. Like they can't go from pairing the target with food one day to shifting out the next. It's
right. Oh no, yeah, no, I'm gonna stay,
it's baby steps.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But like we have that false water cobra here, and that was donated by West Liberty University because I coached a grad student who was training them for her thesis project, and she was working with 27. Whoa. So this one of them got sent here so that I could experiment with it and coach her. And that's a snake that, you know, I don't know. I wouldn't want to manage that snake without her being target trained. Like she's too wild and crazy, and with my luck I'd be allergic to the bite if she bit me, you know. I just don't have to worry about that because she's target trained, and she will shift in and out, and I don't have to mess with her, and she can just be happy and do her thing. That's very remarkable. Nice.
It's such a, like, I'm very excited. I can't even say it enough. I'm excited. I'm very excited for the possibility of being able to, at some point, regardless of the time frame, interact with some of these other animals that are a little bit more standoffish or scared or whatever their issue is, being able to approach them in a way that's both manageable for me without removing blood from my body, and manageable for them
longer
as well.
Than others.
Of course.
Like you never know how long an individual's can take. I've had some just pick it up so quickly, and then others, you know, have taken a really long time, and you're taking like more baby steps with this one. And you're thinking, wow, this week it moved another inch. Okay, now this week it moved 2 inches. But then you've got others that are like going from here to here, like in one session. They just get it.
Right. What's this thing moving in front of me?
Well, and that's another thing. So animals can have different reactions the first time they see the target, right? It could just be a neutral stimulus. Like it means nothing to them. So they're just like, it's nothing. Some might be afraid of it, right? Because they're like, oh my God, what is that? And then others might be curious about it and be like, what's that?
Yeah.
So don't mistake curiosity for, oh, somehow she already knows how to target, because I've had clients do that. Well, he followed the target the first time. No, he was curious about the target, and he was investigating the target.
Right. It's a little different.
No idea what it means.
But so, I mean, if Greg, do you have a question? You've been sitting there. I don't know if you didn't look like you had a question, but I want to just make sure.
No, I think I'm just like, I think I'm half asleep, honestly.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is a little late here in New York. We're at what, 10:15 or something? I can't see.
Are you guys both on the East Coast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I stay up all night anyway.
Me too. It's fine.
A lot of the nocturnal species, so I'm wide awake. But
my alarm goes off at 4:30 in the morning.
So late.
Nope, you're totally fine. Yeah. We definitely, this morning was definitely an oddball morning for me. Usually I don't wake up at 4 o'clock, but this particular day, I don't know why. Just that's when I woke up, and here I am still at 10:17 at night, going and having deep philosophical, life-changing conversations. It's pretty important.
Of what you're saying and what I'm saying. And
Well, thank you for
so
that.
that's a good
I
thing.
hope-
And
I
Greg is
hoped.
quiet.
I hoped, because I
I think
definitely told Greg before we came on here, like, I'm going to be lucky if I remember who I am by the time we're done talking today.
no, you definitely are doing just fine. And Greg and I spoke before, and I got this since he was a quiet person anyway.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. This has
He
been a
told me
great.
that you do most of the talking. When we spoke, he said
Thanks,
that
Greg.
you do most of the talking.
I will never stop talking. As a point in fact, I can hear my fiance snickering in the other room already because someone mentioned me talking. It's just 20 years of talking. I don't stop. You want to talk about reptiles? I will talk all day. I have no problem with that. They fascinate me. They always
That's
have.
how I tend to be too. I
Yep.
can just talk about animals forever.
Yep.
And I always have, my brain is always working. And so I always have something to say.
Yeah. It's opinions based in fact are always welcome.
I just want to make sure that if you guys had specific questions that I didn't talk so much, they didn't get answered.
The only question that we typically ask all of our guests that we haven't asked yet is, where do you see this particular industry, reptiles specifically, heading in the future? And the other question, which is kind of rolled into that, would be if there is something that you would like to kind of make sure the next group of reptile keepers, generation, whatever you want to call it, the next group of people who are just beginning their adventures in keeping reptiles, what would you want to make sure they know?
I would definitely want to make sure that if you're new to reptile keeping, that you know that it's not different in a behavior sense and in a care sense as far as your interactions with them than with other species. The reptiles still need adequate space. They still need adequate activities to do. They can't just be put in a box and looked at every now and then when you feel like looking at them, because that isn't fair to the animal. They have literally the whole planet to live on and can go anywhere they want within reason. And we can't bring them into our homes and put them in a box and think that that's okay. It's one thing if they choose not to come out and interact, but it's another thing not to allow them the opportunity. So I would hope that new keepers would try to give them opportunities as well as environmental conditions that they would encounter in the wild as best as we can. We can never do it ideally under captive management, but do our best. And don't think it has to be all or nothing. You can start simple and work. The animal should hopefully live 20 years or more. So hopefully maybe you start with something small and you keep improving that animal's life over time. It doesn't have to be, well, I can't give it all of this, so I'll just put it in this shoebox. You start out with something small and then work up to one day I'm going to have all this for it and it's going to be so great. And that journey is very rewarding. As to where I think reptile keeping is going to be in the future, I know where I would like for it to be. And that's where the animals are treated like individuals. The animals are given consideration and treated with respect, and that they're given the most optimal life that we can possibly give them under captive management. That we do everything we can to enhance their well-being as much as we can, given that they are captives. That's where I want it to be. I can't even imagine. So I watch a lot of science fiction and I'm thinking of all those time travel shows that I watch.
Oh, goodness.
And there's always like pivotal points where if this, then this is how the future is. And if this, then it goes this other direction. And I feel like maybe we're at this pivotal point where it could go either way.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's so much disparity in how people not only keep and care for reptiles, but in the way that they think they should be kept and cared for.
Yep.
That depending on certain things happening, the reptile keeping community could go very downhill, or it could leap into the future progressing so that the animals can be their best selves under captive management.
Yeah.
I can't really predict which way that's going to go. I know that in my life and in my own keeping, it will continue to progress.
Right. I feel the same
more
way.
I can give them, the more I will continue to give them.
Yep.
And I just try to celebrate the snake and set good examples that speak for themselves. And I'm not going to tell other people what to do, but if you want to ask me questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Right.
You know, you have to live with the way you're keeping your animals, and you have to sleep at night, and you have to be okay with the welfare you think you're providing. I can't tell you what to do,
Right.
because that never works. You have to make your own decisions.
Yeah. I mean, it's only been about 8 years since I figured out that I'm not going to go tell everybody else what to do. You know, back in the dark time. No, back several years ago, I was more of that, you know, you probably shouldn't do that. You know, very, very calmly. I was never a bully. I was never trying to, but I would see a picture on, you name that social media site here, and I would say, you know, hey, you might want to give it something to climb on, or, you know, just general calm husbandry tips. And, you know, people would be like, I don't have to do that. It doesn't need that. Okay, but it might want it.
And
So
that's
anyway.
also another aspect of behavior science that we don't have time to get into tonight, but there's
Right.
this thing called preference testing, where you give animals under captive management preference tests, and you let them decide what they want and what they don't want, or what they need and what they don't need. And there's a whole science behind how this preference testing is done. So we really can't say what's in another's mind. I can't really, you can tell me what you're thinking, but you could be lying. I don't know what's in your head. So I can't know what's in my snake's head or my dog's head. I can just try, based on the behavior I'm seeing, to determine what I think they want. But I can't do that if I don't give them options and choices and allow them to show me what they like better.
Right. And if they're in a box, they can't tell you anything.
And if they're in a box that you can't see into, they can't tell you when they don't feel well, when they're sick, when they have a health issue. Or if they're a nocturnal snake in a box, they could be doing all sorts of stereotypies all night and maladaptive behaviors all night. And you're sleeping in bed and never know that. And you look at them during the day, coiled up, sleeping, and think they're fine.
Right.
So you really need to watch your animal 24/7 and over time, across seasons, across reproductive cycles, across life stages, because animals will change in their preferences from hatchlings to adolescents to adults to geriatric animals. You really need to be watching your animal all the time and keep up with what their needs are.
That's a fascinating facet of reptile keeping right there. I mean, I have the luxury of dealing with a lot of newer keepers. A lot of the people that we adopt to are this newer generation that's coming into it without that, oh, I can keep this in a plastic tub, you know, and they're approaching it as if they would approach any other captive animal, period. They want to give them enrichment. They want to interact with them. They want to do all of these different things with it. I'm sure some of them have talked about you from your YouTube channel and things that they might have seen in passing. And want to give the reptile a better life. And, you know, after doing this for so long, I can have a conversation with them for 10 minutes and know, well, you can adopt an animal from me. That sounds great. Let's do that. Versus, no, I don't think you should have this animal. And it's a really great thing to see, because even parents of these children are like, this is a sentient creature, you know, it's not like, it's just, they're all in tune with it. And it's really nice to see that. And it's not just dogs and cats that are getting this outpouring of care, husbandry change, thought process change. It's also reptiles that I've been waiting for many, many years to hear some of these things that people are saying when they approach me to adopt something. It's really awesome to actually see that. You know, I've been running the rescue I've been running the rescue for a really long time. And I mean, you know, 20 years ago, you couldn't breed a king snake and sell them for $20. Like now they're $200, and that depends on the species. You know, so I feel like rescue is a much more direct approach to changing the mind of a keeper, because not only do I know what this animal likes, doesn't like, because I've interacted with it, but some of my volunteers may have. They do a lot more interacting than I do. I do a lot more cleaning than they do. That's how this works out. You get to do the fun stuff. I'm going to do the work. And, they really care. I don't know if that's the right word, because I'm sure people 20 years ago cared as well, but they're really vested in that care. They really want to know what makes that animal happy. And that's just something that's absolutely brilliant. 20 years, when I was 18 working in a pet store, it was like, oh, I'm going to buy that cheap lizard and bring it home and put it in an aquarium. There was no connection of that being a living creature. It was just, I'm going to buy that lizard and put it in this and done. Now it's this outpouring of well, how do I not scare it? How do I interact with it so it knows I don't mean it any harm? And just that right there was an amazing change in perception across a lot of
that's
people.
really wonderful to hear that people are worried about that. And I encourage people, if you have a nocturnal reptile species, to put a camera, because people get certain species and figure out that they're awake at night and the person sleeps at night, and they somehow expect it to wake up in the middle of the day and interact. And I don't think you would like it if I woke you up in the middle of the night and said, hey, we're going to go jogging, let's go. But you can put a cameras are so inexpensive now. Put a camera on the enclosure. And how fun is it every day to wake up and then look and see what your snake or other reptile did the night before, and then put new things in there and see if it interacts with those new things while you're sleeping.
That's
something
else
really
I'm gonna do.
Great and fun thing to do if you can't watch the animal all the time. When I worked outside of the animal sanctuary, I had cameras on the animals, and I would be at my day job looking at what the animals were doing. And I got such a kick out of seeing some of the behaviors that they were doing that they don't do when I'm there.
Right. Yeah, no, I some of the stuff that I've caught on camera is absolutely remarkable. Even if it's just, if I'm doing a Zoom lecture or whatever, and I go back and I watch it, and I'm watching the animals moving in the background behind me, and they're doing weird stuff, right, exactly. And they're doing weird things. The Savannah monitor that I've been talking about for a while, his name is Theo, by the way. He happens to consistently come up to the glass, and he will be like, I know this is how this door opens, and I'm going to put my hand right through the corner, and I'm just going to move it slowly, and I'm going to make enough noise that you turn around and look at me, and I'm just going to do this, and I know to turn around and look to make sure I'm not opening the door. Now, I've figured out in his biggest enclosure that he's in right now that he can't open that door because the window weighs too much. But when he was smaller and in a smaller enclosure with a smaller window, he could open that door every single time I forgot to lock it, which has happened many times, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, this one wants out, which was why, this is a 6-foot enclosure. He wasn't at the other end pushing on the door. He was at this end pushing on the door, because this is where I am. And I'm his ticket to the door opening to get out. So that's what he was doing a minute ago.
Which is a remarkable way to think about it. I don't think I've ever made that connection inside of me. I don't think a lot of,
and the person sleeps at night, and they somehow expect it to wake up in the middle of the day and interact. And I don't think you would like it if I woke you up in the middle of the night and said, hey, we're going to go jogging, let's go. But you can put a cameras are so inexpensive now. Put a camera on the enclosure. And how fun is it every day to wake up and then look and see what your snake or other reptile did the night before, and then put new things in there and see if it interacts with those new things while you're sleeping.
That's
something else really great and fun thing to do if you can't watch the animal all the time. When I worked outside of the animal sanctuary, I had cameras on the animals, and I would be at my day job looking at what the animals were doing. And I got such a kick out of seeing some of the behaviors that they were doing that they don't do when I'm there. Right.
Yeah, no, I some of the stuff that I've caught on camera is absolutely remarkable. Even if it's just, if I'm doing a Zoom lecture or whatever, and I go back and I watch it, and I'm watching the animals moving in the background behind me, and they're doing weird stuff, right, exactly. And they're doing weird things. The Savannah monitor that I've been talking about for a while, his name is Theo, by the way. He happens to like consistently come up to the glass, and he will be like, I know this is how this door opens, and I'm going to put my hand right through the corner, and I'm just going to move it slowly, and I'm going to make enough noise that you turn around and look at me, and I'm just going to do this, and I know you know to turn around and look to make sure I'm not opening the door. Now, I've figured out in his biggest enclosure that he's in right now that he can't open that door because the window weighs too much. But when he was smaller and in a smaller enclosure with a smaller window, he could open that door every single time I forgot to lock it, which has happened many times, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, this one wants out, which was why, this is a
Yep.
6-foot enclosure. He
Okay.
wasn't at the other end pushing on the door. He was at this end pushing
Right.
on the door because this is where I am. And I'm his ticket to the door opening to get out. So
Right.
that's what he was doing
Right.
a minute ago.
Which is a remarkable way to think about it. I don't think I've ever made that connection inside of me. I don't think a lot of the animals that I have, except for my bearded dragon, will always come to the window and try and get out or ask for food or want food or want to eat food. That's all he wants to do is eat. He'll come out and he'll want to eat, and he'll hang out with me. And then he knows when he goes back that his food bowl's there, and he'll go right back to his food bowl after being held for 20 minutes, an hour,
Right.
5 hours. He doesn't care. And then it's just a remarkable situation to think about it in such a, I want out, you're the one that takes me out, let me out. I'm going to
And
come
not
to you.
every animal wants out. I do want to emphasize
Right.
that exploratory behavior is linked to confidence. So
Mhm.
these ones that do want to come out are really expressing their choice and control for agency, for the ability to decide what happens to them. And freedom is a primary reinforcer for all organisms.
Mhm.
And restraint is aversive. So captivity is aversive to
Right.
anyone who finds themselves restrained or under captivity. So some of them are very eager to come out when they realize they have the ability to ask to come out. But you will see some that don't, that are just on that shyer end of the spectrum. They're content. If you're making their enclosure a place that they feel safe and they're content in, not every snake or presumably other reptile is going to want to come out, and that's okay too. But I think you should still give them options. So every once in a while, open that door while you're sitting in the room and at least give them the option.
Right.
Because I had taken an adult snake that came out after 18 months of me opening the door. And then once he did that once, it was like, oh, now I want to come out all the time. So don't be disappointed, I guess I'm saying, if you have an animal that doesn't want to interact that way and doesn't want to come out. But it doesn't mean don't give them the opportunities, because one day they might surprise you.
Okay. And I think that's a great message to send to anybody that has a reptile that may be a little bit more fearful of human interaction. I don't think I would say, let's go pick up your emerald tree boa, for example. But I would say that if you're providing it a large enough space in its home enclosure and it can move around, then you're doing a good job. But if it's in something that's too small for it, you should definitely give it access to roam at night or what have you, when it's going to be active, and you have to make that choice for yourself. And it's the animal that's going to give you the information that you need to be able to make that educated choice. It's not just a blind luck situation. If I open the door for the Savannah monitor, he'll sit there at the door and he won't come out. If I put my arm there and I give him the bridge to climb, he'll come out. The bearded dragon will jump out of the enclosure and land on whatever's floating in the room that he can hold on to. And my carpet python's the same way. When I open her door, she'll come out, but she's also kind of habituated to it. That's our style of interaction. I don't reach into her enclosure. She's a carpet python. I don't need to feel the teeth. That's my statement. I will end with, but and then it's with other snakes. I try and feel out their personalities and what is the scenario that's going to allow me to clean your enclosure, to fill your water, to interact with you in any way that's comfortable for you, period. And I go through that with everything that comes in.
Sometimes that might be the snakes in their hide. Okay, perfect. Cover the hide entrance with a rock or something. clean the enclosure, change the water,
Right.
remove the barrier from the hide. The snake was safe. You did what you needed to do. You didn't have to disrupt
Right.
anything.
Right.
You know, and then I'll have people say, well, my snake uses the bathroom and sheds in his hide. Well, then
Right.
wait. So you clean the whole rest of the enclosure, wait until he's not in his hide, and you clean that part.
Right. Right. Exactly. You know, and I mean, that's a really safe way to approach an animal that may or may not be willing to let you do what you think you need to do.
Mhm.
And I think that's really good advice. That's very sound advice to anyone who has a serpent that may be a little more timid, a little less inclined to be appreciative of your wanting to clean their enclosure.
We have a
you noticed?
wide spectrum of temperaments here, like some that are like super shy, and then others that would never go in their enclosure if I let them live outside all the time.
Gotcha. And I'm sure that's across species as well. I would assume there's some of those
Absolutely.
species would be the exact opposite of each other. You know, some would be outgoing and very social and want to go all over the place, and then others
Correct.
that are timid and stay in their hide. Which is
Yeah, and that's a huge piece of advice I give people that are looking to add a snake or reptile is don't just get it based on your friend has it or how it looks. I mean, really
Right.
be honest about what your expectations are and your lifestyle,
Mhm.
and get a species that is more likely than not to fit in to your lifestyle.
That's
So,
a
you know, if
great.
you want to interact
great-
with your snake all the time and see them all the time and you sleep at night, don't get one that's active at night. Don't
Right.
get one that's known to hide most of the time.
Right.
You know,
Right. I can't even agree with you more. When we first initially take an application for adoption, the first conversation is always with me, no matter what. And I usually steer them into the direction of the animal that's going to fit their needs. You know, I can't tell you how many people in the last 6 months I've already said, no, you don't want a bearded dragon. You want a leopard gecko.
mhm.
That's going to be more
Well, yeah,
conducive.
because
Well,
what
it's going to
happens when
be
they're disappointed with the animal,
right.
right? The animal
Right.
disappoints them. It's not what they wanted. It ends up at your rescue.
That's even more of a situation that has never happened personally. I've never had an animal come back ever in all the years that we've been doing this, just simply because we try and match the correct animal with the correct household. And I ask a lot of questions. What is it that you're looking for in a pet reptile? Do you travel often? Are you comfortable with insects? Are you looking for something that your 5-year-old wants to touch constantly, or are you looking for something that is going to be like a once a week handling session? You know, what is your want? And then I try and match something that we have
Right.
in our facility, or I even tell them that, we don't have anything that matches what you need in your household right now. Please, I'll keep you on file for a year and we'll revisit it as things come in. But it's a really, really important scenario to talk about that. And when you're walking through a reptile expo, none of that is happening. None of that pet responsibility conversations are happening. And I know expos are huge and everybody likes them, but at the same point in time, I don't really feel it's conducive to a true pet situation. There are keepers who go to reptile expos looking for specific species, and they're doing something very specific, and I respect that and I understand that. And there are animals that are available at expos that you can't readily find in other places, and it still happens that there's imported animals that a lot of really true diehard keepers do work with, and I understand those premises. But when it comes to, you have a person who has 100 royal pythons, they're breeding those royal pythons, they have 20 babies that they're on that table. That's not the situation that I see as the best way for that snake to get the proper care. And not that those breeders are wrong for what they're doing. Not all of them are terrible breeders. Most of the people who are actually paying for tables are actually reputable and good people. But at the same time, you have this overbearing, what is the word that I'm looking for, because it's late, impulse.
Well, I know
It's the
expos
impulse
are
that
like
does it in.
the impulse buys, and
Yep.
they
Yep.
like how this animal looks,
Yep.
and so they buy the animal. without questioning how is the animal going to behave and when is it normally awake,
Right.
and not knowing if it's on the bold or shy end of the temperament
Right.
spectrum, and or anything. And that could be, you could luck out and get one that works out, or
Right.
it could be a train wreck.
Yeah.
You know, and I see the train wrecks because people want my consulting
Oh, yeah.
services because they took their snake home and I never see my snake. It never comes out.
Yeah.
And when I take it out to handle it, it strikes at me. Yeah, because you're intruding into its space and you're
Right.
forcing it out to handle it, and it's
Right.
terrified. Stop, you know,
Right.
leave it alone. But people don't consider that. So my love-hate relationship with expos is, of course, I love to see animals, right?
Right.
I
Right.
love to see animals. But then I don't like seeing them treated like merchandise.
Yep.
And sold to any random person that has the money to buy them, with no thought as to how that animal's life is going to end up when it leaves your table.
Right. Right. That's a very, very well said way to put it. I agree 100%. It's not completely insidious, but it's not always the best scenario either. And I like your word train wreck, you know, especially for train wreck of a reptile being shy, because for me, train wrecks are usually like, well, we bought this tegu and now it's 4 feet long and all it does is run at us with its mouth open, you know. So like those are the train wrecks we get to deal with occasionally. from
Well,
time
and
to
see,
time.
those train wrecks can be prevented with training. If
Oh, yeah,
people-
those-
just like dogs, just
Oh,
like
yeah.
horses, if you train the animal when it's a baby,
Yep.
you won't have a monster when it's an
adult.
adult.
Yep. The same could
Train
be
the
said for kids
T-Rex
too, you know.
right after it comes out of the egg,
Yep.
not when it's, you know,
Yep.
10 feet tall.
Yep. I've definitely had interactions with tegus that went from they were atrociously aggressive or defensive. I have definitely met a few tegus that were aggressive. It was not defense. They were not scared of anything at all. They were just being that big, dominant, testosterone-filled male and chasing me right out of their territory. There was no
Yeah,
question
that's
in my mind what that
territoriality.
animal wanted.
So
And,
aggression is a whole nother realm of behavior science that could be a whole podcast episode, because
right.
aggression is normal.
Yep.
And it's evolutionarily adapted to benefit organisms. But there are all sorts of different types of aggression.
Yep.
There's territoriality. There's just, it's a whole
it's a
complex,
very large spectrum of differences. Yeah.
It
I
is.
definitely understand it. That might be our next podcast though, if you're willing to come back. That is, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to come back, and if you want to talk about a specific topic, because people throw that word aggressive around a lot.
Yep.
And aggressive behavior can encompass so much. Yes, territoriality. It can encompass mating behavior. It can encompass defensive behavior,
Yep.
fear behavior. There's a whole bunch of different aspects to aggression. And
Yeah.
when
And
people throw that word out, sometimes they're not even using it correctly.
Yeah,
but
I
you're
hear a
using
lot of
it in the
people-
sense that it sounds like that tegu was territorial,
right.
and that
Right.
is an aspect of aggression. And if you think about how that was evolutionarily adapted,
Oh yeah.
you know,
I don't blame the animal for it.
beneficial to that tegu.
I don't blame. There's never been a thought in my head that any animal that comes in that wants to bite me or inflict any sort of wound to me is at fault. It's not their fault. I'm willing to take it if I absolutely have to. It has nothing to do with them. They're perfectly adapted for life the way that they were perfectly adapted for life. And I mean, if the 5-foot giant tegu wants to come running at me with his mouth open, we'll figure that out too. It's scenarios that play out. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, I give him a nice closed fist and I just hold my hand out and I let him do what he's going to do to figure out what he needs to figure out. Am I a threat? I'm not a threat. I'm standing here. I'm going to stand my ground. You're not going to chase me away. But at the same point in time, I'm not going to do anything reactionary and I'm not going to cause you to bite me. I'm going to stand here.
Right.
You're going to realize that I'm standing here and let's hope for the best. I've done that with
Yeah, that's the
alligators
first-
too. 5.5 foot alligators as well. Never done it with caiman
mean,
because
that's-
caiman are too quick.
One of the first steps in habituation is just getting the animal used to your physical presence in the area. And then you work up from there, which it sounds like that's what you're doing, but it sounds like you're doing it maybe with the enclosure open. I don't recommend that for families. I
No.
recommend like reading a book, working on your computer,
Right.
just like how I'm sitting outside of this enclosure. This snake is so used to me now
Right.
that there's nothing different now if I open this than there
Yeah.
is with it closed,
Right.
because I work here all the time. and he's used to me.
Right.
So now he's used to my presence and proximity. Now I open the door and he can start getting used to
Totally
smelling
okay with
me, maybe touching me, working up to other things.
Are you an advocate for like the scent training where, they say take an article of clothing and put it in with an animal to get them a little more familiar with human scent? I'm just curious. That's a question that literally just
I'm not opposed to it as long as you're not putting that where it would interfere with the animal accessing resources if
Okay.
it needed to. So
Gotcha.
if I want to like roll up a t-shirt and put it somewhere in the enclosure, the animal can choose to investigate my scent or not, just like it could choose to investigate any other
Right.
novel object I put in there or not. But you don't want to put those things where if the animal happens to be afraid of it, it keeps it from getting to
Right.
water.
Yeah, you don't want to make it a
hide
barrier.
or thermal regulating.
Right.
Right. So you put it somewhere the animal doesn't have to go to use its enclosure,
Right.
but it could choose to go there and investigate it and then get used to it. And it becomes familiar with that. So it's not a big deal anymore. And then, yeah, presumably when it's near you, it's already going to be familiar with your scent. But you could do that with anything too. You could do that with a snake hook, with rubber latex gloves, with
Right.
The target, with anything you want the snake not to be afraid of. You could just put it in an unused area of the enclosure and let the snake interact with it, or the lizard interact with it when it wants to over time. And then when it's ignoring it, then you take it out because now it's used to it. And now if you use that with the animal
already
on purpose,
understands
it's going to be like, whatever, I already know what this is.
Yeah, I know that was there. It didn't do anything the time it was in here with me, kind of a thing. Right.
Well,
That
and
makes
the thing
sense.
is that allows them to approach and investigate it
On
through
their
their
own.
own choice, and they can approach and retreat
Brilliant.
in their own time. You're not forcing it on them, because usually
Yeah.
anything you force on another, you're already starting out at a level that with a bad association.
Right. Right.
If you decide to go swimming and learn how to swim, you're going to have a different emotional valence about that experience than if I pick you up and throw.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
In one circumstance, you may end up loving swimming, and the other circumstance, you're like, I never want to go near the water again.
Right. It could be an inner fear forever for no reason. Well,
Right.
for a reason, I shouldn't say no reason, excuse me. For a very good reason, because you were forced into it. You were petrified of it. But that's definitely
always different when we have the choice. Just like some people will say, well, my snake was pushing on the glass and pacing. I opened the door, but then they just sat on the threshold hanging out. Well, yeah, because now they have the choice.
Yeah.
They just wanted the door open. They may
Right.
not actually want to come out, but they want the option to come out.
Right.
So think about quarantine during the pandemic.
Yeah.
How many people said, oh, I wish I could work from home. I wish I never had to leave the house.
Right.
But as soon as you're forced to stay there, it's all like, man, I don't want to be here. I wish I could go back to work. I wish I could go do this. I don't want to be stuck in the house. It's just a psychological difference between the option being there and the option not being
there. Yeah. I definitely was the latter part of that. I very much so enjoyed being trapped in my home. Just so we're very clear.
Well, I live in an animal sanctuary.
Right.
I never want to leave anyway.
At the time, all of the animals were here with me. They were behind me. Yeah. But it was definitely a time that I got to see and interact with a lot of animals in a very different way than I really ever have in my life. It definitely woke me up a lot to just how interactive some of these animals can be, even from within a barrier, within their enclosure, while I'm sitting in the room 24/7 on my computer setup, or my son was doing school sitting next to me at his desk. Seeing what they were doing behind us was remarkable. Like, just absolutely remarkable, having that 24-hour a day access and being here for 24 hours a day, not being overtired at 2 o'clock in the morning if I happen to sleep in that day because they didn't have school or whatever the case may be. To see all of those different behaviors at all of those different times of day as well was remarkable to watch. Leopard geckos I find to be fascinating little creatures. We all think they're very calm and very quiet, but the 4 that I have had for a while, they were not calm, and they are not quiet, and they are rambunctious little things. They run like a bearded dragon all night long, looking through their enclosure for
Really?
food, for whatever. I mean, they are active as all possible. It's remarkable to see how active they were.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah, it was really, they dig, they want to go into burrows, they want to go in and out of their hides, that, they're all over that enclosure. And it may not be for 8 hours that they're running around, but a tiny little lizard that most people don't even get to see move around because they're technically a crepuscular species, and they're kind of dawn dusk when we're asleep or dinner, and they're kind of active. You have this whole scenario play out where they don't really move. You open the door, they kind of scurry away. You reach in and they think you have food, so they come out, and they're really decided what they're going to do before they do it. Most of the time, they're not an animal that I see reacting on instinct. They're a really thought-driven species of gecko. Anyway, to see that is remarkable. To have worked with them for 20 years, and then all of a sudden I have this whole new understanding of leopard geckos and what their behaviors are and what they're doing and how they're interacting with their own environment. I was an advocate for, leopard geckos do great in rack systems when I was younger, and now it's like I would never do that again. This is remarkable. They're completely active. They're super fun, super happy. And I mean, for quarantine purposes, of course, I do utilize racking occasionally if absolutely necessary, but that's only because sometimes I have to, mites and things that are possible to spread through the rest of the community. I have to have a dedicated spot that I can clean very, very well. And racking systems, unfortunately, have proven to be a sustainable, sterile situation where you can keep things from transmitting from one to the other, and so on and so forth. So I do utilize them in quarantine purposes. And I find really young baby snakes do really well with 3 sides of an enclosed area. So they do work for young snakes as well.
I just for people who have pets, I mean, I don't have any racks here. So what I do for the babies, like I've taken some in very young as part of my work, like 3 weeks old. I put them in a 6-quart tub with a lid and a hole in the top. And then I put it in a big habitat, a big furnished habitat. So they can live in their little shoebox if they want. I put water in there and substrate and a hide, or they can, come out whenever they want. And some of them come out right away and they're like, hey, and they're using the whole space. And others, they're more hesitant. They take longer to come out and start like slowly exploring, but that way
they can choose
their choice. And
makes total sense.
I'm not forcing one or the other on them.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It does.
It's a good transition, because most of, especially the snakes people buy, unfortunately, are going to come from rack keepers. Right. And so if the snake, that's all it's ever known, then it's what habituated, it has learned to succeed in. That's what it's going to be used to. Right. And I really am not an advocate for making sudden changes. That's always stressful. Right. So if you can set up a little rack tub, go ahead and put it in your elaborate enclosure. Just give the snake the option to come in and out as it pleases, where they want to be.
And that's a great idea.
Well, it eases transition stress.
That's a great idea. I'm definitely going to. I mean, most of the animals that we rehome are 6 months and above. Very rarely do we take in anything that's younger than that age, because most of the time people have tried, air quotes, tried their best to do whatever. So we have a little bit more established animals coming to us, and I find that to be both a positive and a negative at times. Some have been established very negatively, and their situations are very different than what I would say is conducive. And then others have been established fantastically, and then coming into our setup, they refuse food for a while. They become a lot less outgoing and a little more apprehensive, whatever that constant change. And it's mostly royal pythons. Rat snakes of all species, they're fine. They usually don't have any transitional issues. Carpets, kings, milks, most lizards that aren't bearded dragons or agamas, beardies will go through a very, very slow process to get back into being themselves sometimes. Frilled dragons also, they're very reclusive until they're comfortable, and once they're comfortable, then they're on fire. They're
I
crazy.
mean, think of this natural stress responses of those species you mentioned. I see that here too, that if I randomly choose a carpet python or a Brettles python or a
Mhm.
corn snake, the chances that it's going to be resilient enough to adapt to life with me with no issues are a lot higher than if I randomly choose a royal python who is going to have a higher level of stress in reaction to most things than
Right.
these other snakes. It's going to have lower resiliency to change.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know how they became the #1 pet snake. That could be a whole nother episode too. I don't recommend them as someone's first pet
Nope.
snake.
What do you recommend?
Well, I have a process that I go through with my clients where I ask them a whole bunch of questions about their expectations and what their ideal life with their snake looks like. And I help them find a species that's appropriate for them. But in general, I'm just saying royal pythons don't have a temperament that makes them a good candidate for someone's first
Right.
family pet. If you're talking about the typical family that's got kids and other pets and chaos, and I want to hold my snake and show my friends, and I want it to be awake during the day, like nothing about a royal python is
Says
that.
any of that? Yeah,
Like,
nothing.
it's absolutely the opposite of everything I just said.
Right.
There are other snakes that are going to adapt to that kind of lifestyle much better. Super dwarf reticulated pythons, rat snakes, corn snakes,
Yep.
carpet pythons, some of the boa species, and there's a ton of boa species, so they're all different too. You have to
Yep.
go through their
Yep.
individual temperaments. But a royal python would not be what I generally recommend.
No, I'm the same way. I generally don't recommend royals for just about any household. There have been probably 2 in the last year that were like, yeah, you know, I think your household would do really well. You know, it was a older kid. He was probably 14 or so, and I believe in one case they were homeschooled. It was just him in the household with 2 parents, no other pets. So, you know, calm, quiet atmosphere. Their demeanors were very calm. The people who I interacted with that are in the household were
Right.
very relaxing, and I think it was a really good. I mean, I just actually got a picture while we were doing this podcast
Yeah.
of that snake, which is why I thought about it. So I generally don't think that they make very good first reptile captives, and I
It's
mean,
because they're very easily impacted
mhm,
by everything.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
very easily stressed by things. And here's the problem is their stress response is a quiet stress response. So people think they're okay because they're not recognizing that
Yep.
that body language they're seeing is their stress response, is their defensive behavior.
mhm,
And instead of leaving it alone, you're handling it even more because, oh, look how docile it is. It's
docile,
so
right.
cute. It's all balled up and it's terrified.
Right.
And then people just wonder why it's not eating. And it's just this whole feedback loop that's very negative.
Right.
And it's no fault of the snake. They're who they are.
Yep.
You can't make them into something they're not. And then people don't understand what they're seeing. And it's just, royal pythons make okay pets for some people.
Mhm.
If you just want to have a snake that you don't interact with a ton, you know it's there, you see it some, you feed it every now and then, you enjoy looking at the enclosure. Oh, and occasionally you're going to have an outlier that's more active. I have a couple here that are very active and engaged and like to come out, but to get one like that at random would be just sheer luck.
Right.
You know,
That's how this one is.
The one that's at your place, Greg, now?
Very active. Like right now is staring out at me.
he probably wants out.
He wants out.
Yeah, and he's not, or she is not scared of like because she's in a big like a big sterilite.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what you call it anyway. Big sterilite thing. So you have to take
Sterilite
the top,
tub. Yeah.
Yes, I have to take the top off of it. And
She doesn't
with
react.
royals, typically things happening above them is like
Right.
the end of the world. But she's not like that at all. Like I'll take the top off and move it, and she's out. She's coming out.
That's neat.
So it's very rare.
It is rare. There are some royals that are like that, but like I said, if you're at an expo randomly picking one out, the
Yeah, the
chances
luck
of you
is
picking one out like that is very low. But if I'm
Yeah.
at an expo randomly picking out a carpet python or a certain species of boa or a Brettles python, chances are I'm going to be pretty happy with it because
Yep.
it's a more resilient species overall.
Yeah.
And they adapt very well to change overall.
Yep.
And they have better coping skills.
Yeah.
I want to say.
That's a very astute observation. The coping skills from royals to just about every other common species are very different. You know, I definitely the timidness of royals, and sometimes the timidness of royals really mean like they stay with me even extra time over their quarantine period and over their what would be readily available, you know, even after they're feeding and whatnot, just because I don't want to say the word trust, but I don't necessarily trust that their behaviors are going to continue to improve if I change what they're going through now. So if I'm interacting with them in a certain way, and I've got them on the path to eating every time food is offered, and they're coping with their environment and where they're living and how they're living, I don't want to say, here's a new pet for you, and then, oh my God, a month worth of work goes right out the window. You know, I'll keep them for 2, 3, 4 months just to make sure that when this animal goes to its new home, I know that it's going to, if you listen to me and you do the same routines that I am telling you to do, at least for the first couple of months till you start working your routines in, you'll be able to care for this reptile, and this reptile will appreciate the care that you're giving it. And he's not going to have any change in any of his behaviors. Maybe for the first 2 or 3 days, he might not come out of the hide if we're changing enclosures. But aside from that, he'll go right back. And that's the way it is. I also tell pretty much everybody that adopts from me that I don't want them to handle it until it feeds, regardless of the species. That's across the board. And I tell them, you know, put them in the environment, make sure, you know, obviously all the temperatures, all of that stuff has already been checked and made sure everything was correct. And just let them acclimate for 7 days. If it's a lizard, it's like 2 or 3 days. Just let them acclimate. Let them get comfortable with their surroundings. Don't even go over and stare at them. Just let them do their thing. And if you do that, you're probably going to have a great success the first time you go to feed. If you're picking it up and you're showing your friends and you're taking pictures and you're doing all kinds of weird stuff with it right off the bat, it's going to go, oh my God, what is going on here? What happened?
It's going to be terrified.
Right.
And remember how slowly, so snakes' metabolisms are slower than mammals.
Yep. By a
So
lot.
people need to realize that when they have a stress response and those stress hormones are released into the body, it takes much longer for those to dissipate from your snake than it does from you or your dog.
Right.
So they are not necessarily going to be okay the next day or in a few hours.
Right.
Those stress hormone levels are going to stay elevated longer.
Right.
So
inadvertently,
people
7
need
days
to
is a good
realize too, because I've heard this. Oh, he's already exploring the enclosure and he loves it and he's moving all over.
Right.
He has no idea that is home. It's a strange place. He's nervous. He's pacing. He's edging.
Yeah.
The animal is learning what the barriers are, learning what the parameters are, possibly scent marking the territory. That's not like comfort and relaxation. That's, I have no idea where the heck I am, and I'm going all over the place trying to figure it out. So then when you notice in a week or two, the snake's less active and hiding more, they're finally content and quiet and realize that's home and they're okay in it. But people think the opposite. People think, oh, they were more active when I first got them. Yeah, because they were scared.
And I think it's really hard for a person in general to understand, especially if they're new to reptile keeping, that it could be either way. This snake could be terrified and moving around a lot, or it could be completely still and terrified and not comfortable. So it could be either way. So when you tell somebody, well, if it's moving around a lot, it could be scared. If it's sitting still, it could be scared. People are like, what? I don't know. How is that a possibility? Well, because you don't know how the snake is going to react. You don't know how he's going to act to his new environment, her new environment. And that's something that you'll have to watch. That's one of the things I preach. You'll see it on our care guides and everything that we produce here at the rescue. I talk about watching your animal, period. You're not going to know that your animal needs something unless you're paying attention to it. If you're not paying
Mhm.
attention to it, then the littlest thing, the littlest cue that any reptile does could be the difference between life and death at some point, because these animals hide their illnesses so well so that they're not prey in the wild. It's not even funny. And just like a bird, you know, birds, once you notice a bird is sick, usually they are really sick.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for
Yeah.
reptiles. And if your area doesn't have a good reptile vet, then you're out of luck. I mean, I know for the longest time up here, up until like 8 years ago, when the vet that I use opened up, there were no reptile vets here. There was a reptile vet
And
telling people to put bearded dragons on aquarium pebbles in Newburgh, 20 miles south of me. And I used to tell people, you don't want to take your animal to that vet. I know they say exotic
well,
vet,
and
but
people need to understand that your area is not just the 10 minutes from your house. Like
agreed.
I
Agreed.
traveled 90 minutes to my reptile veterinarian, who's excellent, who does surgeries, has done surgeries on my snakes. 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, that's still in my area. It
Right.
isn't like I'm telling you to drive 18 hours.
Right.
But
And
people
I
have
agree
told me,
100%.
well, there's a vet near, there's a vet an hour away. Okay.
Well, then that's nearby.
So go to that one.
Yeah, my vet happens to be almost an hour away, ironically
Yeah.
enough. But and I mean, up here when we were first starting to do all of this, it was really a miserable situation with veterinary care, because there wasn't all that information out, and we didn't have local people that worked with the flora and fauna that would know any of that anyway, because here in New York, we don't have a large reptile population. We have a lot of turtles, but we don't have 100 different lizard species or 25 different snake species living here. We're not Texas, we're not South Florida. We don't have that necessity to have medical personnel here to be able to treat the wildlife that live here, which coincides with treating the captive pet animals that we would want to take in. And so for the longest time, I really kept people from, like, don't go to certain vets that you think say exotic, because they're not always correct and they don't always know what they're talking about. And even some of those vets, they didn't learn anything about reptile medicine.
Right.
They're just telling you they're an exotic pet so that they can further their business. And
There's a difference between being willing to see a snake or other exotic pet
Right.
and actually
Right.
knowing how to treat them. So I'll ask questions like, how is your clinic capable of doing induction anesthesia on my snake?
right.
Are you capable of doing ultrasounds and radiographs and surgeries on my animal?
Yep.
If the answer is no,
Then
then
I'm sorry,
thank
we have to
you.
move on. Yep.
Right.
Yep. I work, the vet that I work with is fantastic. She trained under an exotic vet out of Florida, and she moved up here. I don't know if she saw like an open niche maybe and realized that she could kind of corner the market, but they do. I mean, anytime I'm there, there's 20 people waiting. Anytime.
I beg people to go into reptile medicine because
It's
like my reptile vet is booking appointments 2 months out right now. 2
Yeah.
months out.
Yeah. I mean,
Now,
I'm
if I
lucky.
have an emergency,
Yeah,
you
I get
know,
seen.
then she'll get me in sooner. But for regular appointments, 2 months out because she's so busy.
Yeah. And that's phenomenal. If they're really good at what they do, that is a great situation to have, not necessarily 100% great, but it's great for that vet to be that busy perpetually. It means they usually are pretty good at what they do. If they have an opening tomorrow,
Yeah.
I don't
It
know.
means we need more people going into reptile medicine
Yeah.
and reptile research. And I just can't emphasize that enough to young people who are just deciding what they want to do. If you already love reptiles, consider going into a reptile field.
Right.
That would help other reptile keepers, like behavior, like medicine,
Right. And
microbiology,
I think
neuroscience.
I think we could definitely further the understanding of reptiles with more people and more opinions in medicine to begin with. It's just a sheer lack of pursuant. People haven't pursued reptile medicine. I don't know why. but it's one of those scenarios that even when I was younger, I thought about being a vet. Obviously I'm not, but I definitely thought about it for a long time. And obviously I would have specialized in reptiles. But then, I think the whole situation came to like, if I'm going to work with reptiles and I'm going to be a reptile vet, then I can't live in New York, because New York doesn't have a huge reptile group of, but now here 20 years later, it's exploded and has become, they're second to almost nothing now. But I think we're pretty tired. I think we're gonna
Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys.
I think we're
kept
gonna
you up
end
so
up
late.
getting going. I appreciate you coming out all the way from Colorado, you said, correct?
Yeah,
And
Colorado.
we will definitely reconvene and talk some more over time. You can find me on any social media sites. I'm Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue. I'm everywhere, whatever you prefer to use social media wise. And we can have conversations anytime you want. All right.
Yeah, Lori, I've been dying to have you on since like this whole podcast.
Yeah, he definitely
situation
asked
started.
me.
Like I've been talking about you for however long now.
Yeah, he asked
Well,
me
thank
months and
you.
months and months ago. We were definitely excited when when Greg had reached out to you and you had okayed it and we planned it all out. It's fantastic. Definitely like to
Well,
hear
thank
a lot
you.
more of what you're doing in the future, though. Absolutely.
No, I'm always happy to talk about behavior and training, and don't hesitate to reach out as you guys are training your own animals if you have questions.
All right, sounds good. I will take that under advisement. No pun intended.
Okay.
Have a great night. Thank you again for being here.
Thank
It was
you.
awesome. This was a
Yeah,
great
thanks a lot,
experience.
Lori. Yeah,
All
really
right. Have a
appreciate
good
it.
night.
Thanks.
Okay.